Hello and welcome to the Career Speakeasy, a casual, fun, and irreverent place to share ideas about career development, the world of work, and life in general. I'm your host and proprietress, Kelly Nottingham. Growing your career should not be boring. So come on in, pull up a chair, and pick your poison. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome. Today's episode is a little bit different than our normal fare. Today we're doing a special episode that I like to call Leader Libations. This is a subset of episodes specifically geared toward people who are in roles of leadership or people who are interested in being in leadership positions. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that if you're not a leader of people that you are forbidden from listening to this episode. It simply means that the topics that we're going to be discussing today are a bit more focused toward a leadership capability than perhaps our average episodes are. We're going to be focusing today on change management again, but this time from a leader perspective, and this time taking it in a different direction than maybe hopefully you've heard about before. If you haven't listened to the previous episode on rolling with change management, I would recommend that you take a listen to that episode as well. It's an in-depth one. It's a little bit longer than some of our others, that breaks down some behaviors and emotions that people deal with during times of change. There's just so much to discuss and delve into in the world of change management, especially with everything that we're dealing with right now, the pace of change in the world that we're working through. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk through some things for leaders specifically to think about when you are trying to lead a team through change. Now, there's a particular photo that's been making the rounds of social media for about 5 years now. It's a photo of a pack of wolves walking through deep snow in a long row. And the commentary with this photo is that the alpha male, the alpha wolf, the lead wolf, the strongest wolf, is leading from the back of the pack and puts the weakest and oldest wolves at the front of the pack. The metaphor that is being built in this description of this photo is that effective leaders lead from the back. You make sure as a leader that you're not leaving anybody behind, and you're basically letting the slower people help set the pace so that nobody is left out of the pack. Now, I'm not going to get into wolf studies because I'm not a wolf expert. I watch a lot of werewolf movies, but I don't think that qualifies me as a wolf expert by any stretch of the imagination. However, I have done a little bit of research on this and have discovered through reading some work on international wolf sites that talk about how wolves work. This is actually not at all true. This statement about the alpha leading from the back, it isn't true at all. And in my reading about how wolf packs organize, and they're very, very organized groups of animals, they have a very structured hierarchical society, that a lot of the mythology of the alpha is actually, it's not true at all. And I guess the reason I wanted to talk about this today, I had this mental picture of that photograph pop up in my brain the other day, and related to that, then this flood of thoughts came into my head about alpha leaders. I've read about and I've heard about a lot of conversation talking about how leaders need to be alphas, taking charge of their team, really helping to push their team forward, leading as a cohesive group, but really kind of being that in-charge person. And then you have the opposite in this photo saying, no, a wolf actually leads from the back. So essentially, all of this is a bunch of baloney. Wolves don't lead this way. In fact, the concept of the alpha male and the alpha female sort of fighting for dominance in the pack, that in itself is not true. I did not know this until I was doing my research. Those are actually the breeding pair of the pack. They are essentially the patriarch and the matriarch of the pack. And the wolves that are in the pack are most of the time their offspring. So what this means is that these packs actually run more like a large family unit. Now, once a wolf gets to a certain age and they are ready to go out and try to start on their own, that's when they become the lone wolf. And they're going out on their own. They're trying to find a mate who is another lone wolf so they can start their own pack. So all of this being said, to say that a lot of the mythology, especially this whole leadership archetype of the alpha leader, leading from either the front of the pack or leading from the back of the pack, it's all based on a bunch of legends and untruths about how wolves work. Now, I know some of you are saying, like, why does this even matter? Also, I'm not the matriarch or patriarch for my team, because if your team is made up entirely of your family members, you may have a nepotism issue at your job, potentially. But this caused me to think about the effectiveness of how a pack could be led when we think about this metaphor of wolves leading the pack, the leader wolf leading the pack, and how they could do that in the most effective way. So we're going to turn these metaphors of wolf leadership on its head. We're going to add in some other places where, as a leader, you can think about how to lead your pack effectively. Yes, it's leading from the front. Yes, it is leading from the back. It's also being in the middle of the pack. It's also about being on the sides of the pack. So we're going to spend this episode talking about the different positions in a team for a leader to work in to be effective during times of change. So as a leader of people during change, where do you need to position yourself within your pack? And we're going to look at the fluidity that it requires to move from position to position in your pack. Okay, so let's jump in. So let's start with the idea of the leader leading from the back of the pack. There's a lot of value to be had in supporting your people from the back of the pack, in the sense that you're making the change initiative a group effort. It's not about you being in the lead. It's not about you in the front of everybody else dramatically leading the parade to victory. When a leader is leading from the back, they're letting their team be the focus of attention. Now, this is especially important in times of change because often people feel, as we discussed in the previous episode, a serious lack of control during times of change, especially when you have a leader who's focused on looking like they're in charge, whether or not they actually are in charge. You find that a team will feel less connected to the change and in less control of the change when the leader is more focused on how they look and how the leader themselves are perceived than on how the team is actually doing. So that idea of leading from the back is all about focusing on the team. It allows the leader to see where the team is headed as a whole directionally. When the leader is at the front, walking forward, it is much more challenging to figure out if the people are even behind you, following you. So this is an opportunity for the leader to see where there may be some challenges, where people may be moving off to the sides of the change, or they may be distracted, or they may be confused, heading in the wrong direction. Whether you may have groups that are splintering into little smaller groups within the larger group. So this idea of leading from the back allows you to see that. It means putting the focus on the team, taking the focus away from you, and you, in a sense, as the back of the pack person, become the person that is there to make sure that everybody's moving forward, making sure that nothing is falling through the cracks. It is more of an opportunity to get feedback on how the change is going and to observe what's happening within the group. The next position we're going to talk about is as the leader in the front position, in the front of the pack. Now, this will sound very conflicting with what we just discussed. But the fact is, as a leader, you do need to be in the front of your pack from time to time. There are important reasons why you should be in the front of the pack, and there are times when it may not be appropriate to be in the front of the pack. When we talk about a leader being in the front, we're talking about being visible. When we're dealing with change at work, and especially if we're a leader of people, we get pulled into meetings, we get pulled into conference calls, we get pulled into strategy meetings, and the change itself and the process change or the policy change, whatever may be going on with that change, can pull us away from time that we would normally spend with our team. This means that we become significantly less visible to our teams. Our team can get lost. They may start to feel paranoid because they see less of you. They don't know what's happening. They know that change is happening, but all they see is your closed door or you moving from meeting to meeting, trying to get things done and not talking to them. Change is disruptive. And when we're in periods of disruption, we will sometimes try to lock ourselves down so that we as leaders can focus on what we're trying to get accomplished. But this can cause us to become less visible to our teams. And visibility during change is absolutely critical. So I'm going to mix up my metaphors here for a second. Let's say that you are the captain of a ship. You're moving into a storm. The crew does not need you down in the cabin looking at charts and looking at maps at that point in time. They need you on the deck of the ship. They need you directing, showing where we're going, and showing that you are confident in the direction that you're taking. Your sense of control over the situation gives your team a sense of confidence in the direction that they are then going. Now, this works the same. Being in the front of the pack also means being a visible example of what the new is going to look like. So instead of the team trying to understand what behaviors they need to exemplify during this change, you, as the leader of the group, the visible leader at the front of the group, you are leading the way by demonstrating and role modeling those behaviors or those new changes for them. Now, this is a big responsibility. Your team will often reflect their behaviors that you are exhibiting during the change. So if you're panicking, the team is more likely to panic. If you, as the leader of the pack, are running in circles and panicking because you're not sure where to go, your whole team, the whole pack, is going to panic and run in circles because they don't know where to go either. If you are being calm, controlled, showing them exactly how things are going to work, your team is going to feel more capable to effectively change. Now, another reason why it's important to be visible and to be at the front of the pack is that it allows for much more open and frequent and effective communication. It's incredible how at times of change in our lives, we need communication more than any other time. But these are often the times when we don't get it because we're in all these meetings. We don't have time to figure out what to communicate. We sometimes let team meetings slip. And when we start to let our normal pace of communication slip at a time when we really should be ramping up the amount of communication that we're doing, we can really start to lose people in this fog of the unknown. People are desperate for information. They're desperate to know what they need to do. And being at the front of the pack means that you are taking charge of communicating effectively. You're communicating to the whole team at one time with all of the information that you have that you're allowed to share. It means being there for them when you don't know the information that they're asking for, or if you can't share it yet too. You can tell them, I'm not able to share that information right now, or I honestly don't know the answer to that right now, but I will let you know as soon as I do. Being at the front of the pack means you have regular scheduled times and methods to communicate the change to your team. It means you're helping them understand by role modeling for them, and it means that you are leading the way confidently so that they can feel more confident as they go through the change themselves. Ooh, okay. So speaking of wolves, I just had to take a little break there to go outside and rescue a water snake from my dogs who were barking at it like crazy. If you hear any barking in the background, I try to edit out as much of the background noise as I can, but if you happen to hear any barking happening at the last few sentences that I spoke, that's what was happening. Super exciting. Everybody was okay, including the little snake, so he's already gone on his way, so everybody's fine. So yeah, that was me being the alpha female for my little pack of animals, I guess. So, back to our topic. Where else can we be in relation to our teams, in relation to our packs? You can be on the sides of the pack. This next role is looking laterally and thinking laterally. This means that you're looking upstream and downstream from your team's function. Are there changes that your team is making right now that are going to affect the teams or the people that are upstream of your function, that are upstream of your process? Are there potential repercussions for the people downstream, the groups that benefit from the work that your team does? Customers that your team may work with directly. As you actively work laterally within your organization by talking to other people in the organization, talking to other team leads, maybe talking to customers who are downstream of your process, and maybe talking to suppliers that are upstream of your process, it gives you an opportunity to see more broadly across the planes of your working environment than maybe just looking from the back and looking at your team and seeing what they're doing directly. It also gives you an opportunity to find out from those other leaders that you're talking to if they are implementing changes that may affect your team. So you may be the downstream to somebody else's change. You're not going to know about that if you don't have that more holistic, broad, sweeping approach that comes when you're not just focused on your team, you're focused laterally on what's happening in the environment around you. So as an example, let's say that you realize looking laterally that there's another team that's going to be affected negatively by the policy change, and they may not realize that this change is coming at all. I know this never happens in organizations where people don't know that a change is coming. But you realize when you think through this process, you're looking at all the teams that may potentially be impacted by this change, that this other team may not even realize this change is coming. You can reach out to that leader and talk to that team to find out what your team can do to be more effective in helping them to deal with the change as it starts to roll downstream. It gives you an opportunity as a leader to be more collaborative with other people in your organization, and it also shows you as a proactive problem solver, which is always useful to be recognized as somebody who is looking out for their own team, but who's also looking out for others in your organization, your customers, your suppliers, finding out what you can do to solve problems before they turn into problems. So this is an opportunity for you as leader to look holistically at what's going on, see if there may be problems, help to address those problems. It also gives you an opportunity to see where there may be places that your team might need to divert off the chosen path. You've already been scoping out a plan B or a plan C. You can look side to side so you can see what other options are there if what your team is currently trying to do is just not working like you thought it would. It also gives you a chance to see if there are other opportunities out there while you're making this change. Maybe we can go ahead and sweep in this other thing that we've been looking at that's a problem. We can go ahead and fix it here. So this whole concept of looking from the sides of the pack is about being able to see beyond just your pack. It's looking around and being aware of what's going on in your environment, side to side. So the last place for a leader to think about in relation to the pack is being in the middle of the pack, right smack in the middle. This is representative of a leader who's willing to dig in and do the work with their team. Nothing destroys morale more than a leader who is not willing to do the work that they're asking for their team to do. So if you're a leader who knows that your team is going to be going through a lot of change, one of the best things that you can do to help them, to make sure that they are really understanding what's going on, they understand what they need to be doing, is for you to be willing to get into the middle of things with them. Let's say, as an example here, that you have somebody who goes out on sick leave. So you've got a gap in the middle of your pack. If you are willing to jump in and help with that work during this time of change, it builds tremendous amounts of trust in you as a leader. It shows that you're willing to put your boots on the ground, or your paws on the ground, as it may be, and work with them to help move the pack forward. It also gives you an opportunity to really communicate with your team in a new and very effective way. You're not just leading meetings from the front of the pack. Being in the middle of the pack means that you are talking to them on a one-on-one basis. You're actually getting up out of your office and you are going to meet your employees where they are. This is an informal type of communication that will often glean a lot more information than you may get in formal front of the pack types of communication. So this also brings up another aspect of communicating with your team that we haven't really talked about yet. We've talked about leading from the front of the pack. We've talked about sharing information effectively from that leadership position. We've talked about the need to communicate effectively, and if I have not stressed that enough, I'm sure I will be stressing that in just a couple of minutes in a couple of different ways. But this idea of leading from the middle of the pack represents not only your willingness to work and do the work that you're asking them to do, to embrace the change that you're asking them to embrace, but it gives you an opportunity to show some vulnerability. It shows your willingness to share with them if you are maybe feeling a little worried about the change. Maybe you have a concern or you've been feeling a little bit overwhelmed. It allows you to show some of that openness with them. I know that the term vulnerability has a lot of weight with it. So another way to think about this is showing that you're human. It's showing that you may be excited, but you may also be nervous. And what that does is it builds tremendous amounts of trust with your team. Now, it's important to not overshare when you're in this situation and say things like, I'm worried about this change. I don't think leadership has thought everything through, and I'm really concerned that this is going to be a disaster and we're all going to lose our jobs. Don't say that. You can share some vulnerability by saying things like, I'm concerned about a couple of aspects of the change, or I am nervous about what the future will hold. However, I feel confident that we're going to be able to get there together. I'm confident we're going to be able to figure this out together. So this is not an opportunity for you to vent to your people and to run around in your little panic circles in the middle of the pack. This is an opportunity for you to get in with the pack, to talk to them on a one-on-one basis, to get to know them a little bit more openly maybe than just that front of the room type of leadership and communication. Having enough oversight and enough separation from the group as leader to be able to identify what is appropriate to say and not appropriate to say to your teams. So those are the 4 positions that leaders can take within their pack when they're leading their team through times of change. We have the front of the pack position. We have the back of the pack position. We have the sides of the pack position, and we have in the middle of the pack position. When we're talking about these 4 positions, what's really critical to understand is that as a leader, and this is where that gray area of leadership comes in, this is where the artistry of leadership comes in, is understanding where to spend your time in each of these positions, how to flex and shift fluidly from position to position so that you are filling a need that your team has when they need it. You can't spend all of your time looking for plan B on the sides of the pack. You can't spend all of your time at the front of the pack taking charge and being visible without actually getting into the middle of the pack. And you can't spend all of your time in the back trying to help and guide just from the back, because the team is sometimes going to need for you to be in the middle. They're going to need for you to be on the front. They're going to need for you to be on the sides. Every team is different. Every situation is different. For those of you who may be listening to this and saying, I need an exact formula for how much time I should spend in each one of these positions, there isn't one. It's going to depend a lot on different factors that are going on within your team, within your organization, within the change, and within the world at large that is really going to affect how quickly or how often you need to switch positions. So let's talk about a couple of these. One is the size of your team. If you have a larger team, you're going to have to work in several different ways to make the dynamic work most effectively. Those middle of the team types of conversations are going to be much more difficult if you have 50 people reporting to you than it is if you have 6 people reporting to you. If you have a smaller team, you may be able to spend more time in that middle of the pack position. You may not find that you have to spend as much time up at that front of the pack position. Another factor is going to be the types of communication that are already going on in relation to the change. When we talked in the previous episode about change management, one of the topics that kept coming up was in reference to control and feeling a sense of control over the change. Leaders, especially senior leaders within an organization, are often ready to move on to the next change when frontline employees are just starting to understand the change because they are behind the curve in understanding what's going on with the change and adapting to that change. Senior leaders have already gone through all of those stages of understanding and being frustrated or being concerned and adapting to that change, and they've already moved on to the next change. They don't want to talk about it anymore. If you work in an organization where senior leadership is really good at communicating the vision of the change and what the future is going to look like with that change, the steps, the milestones with the change, you may find that your front of pack role is not one you have to take on as often because that communication is happening for your group. So you're able to spend more time in the middle of the pack, in the back of the pack, and on the sides of the pack. If you are in an organization like many that really struggle with communication during times of change, you may find that at the beginning of the change, you need to be more at the front of the pack to share that communication openly. And I will add just 1 or 2 thoughts about communicating during times of change. So, this can be for front of the pack, or it can be for in the middle of the pack. You are going to need to communicate way more often than you ever thought necessary. You're also going to need to communicate in multiple ways to get the information across to people. When people are feeling resistant to change, they're afraid of change, or they're angry about change, they are not listening to every word that you say. Shocker, I know. They're only taking in, if you're lucky, half of the words that you're saying. So you're going to need to communicate, recommunicate until you are sick of talking about that change before people are really able to accept that the change is happening and they're able to really take in all of the information that you're trying to give. Change is also a time of paranoia for a lot of people. They get very concerned, sometimes justifiably concerned that they're going to lose their job or that their work is going to be harder than it was in the past because of this change. These are times when we as leaders sometimes feel that we need to be talking more one-on-one with our people. We need to be in the middle of the pack talking about the change. And that is true. However, and this is a big however, you need to communicate information the first time, especially big announcement types of change communication, to the entire group. You need to be at the front of the pack if you're communicating new information. That is not the time to share information from the middle of the pack, because the wolves that are closest to you in the middle of the pack are going to find out first. The wolves that are on the outside of that pack are going to feel left out, and that is going to create a break or a schism or a splinter in your pack. So when you are communicating new information, that needs to be done consistently and to the entire group at one time. And then you can use the middle of the pack follow-up communication to find out how they're taking it, how they're understanding it, and really answer some of those questions. You may get questions in the middle of the pack that you are hearing repeatedly from lots of different people. And at that time, you can then take that information and say, you know what, maybe I need to go back to the front of the pack, communicate this out to everybody at one time so that we're all on the same page. The last little thing that I wanted to mention before we wrap up with our last call is that the size of the change varies based on the perspective of the person who is dealing with the change. I have been in many organizations training on change management with teams that are dealing with a big change, one big change. When a group is dealing with a big change, in many ways, it is easier than dealing with a series of small or medium-sized changes. For my international listeners, we have a saying in the US, we call something the straw that broke the camel's back. What this phrase means in relation to change is that we're piling on one thing after another, and that there is a breaking point where people can't deal with any more change. We call this change fatigue, and it is something that I am hearing more and more from clients, both at the corporate level and at the personal level, in coaching sessions that I do with my clients, where they are really struggling with just the number of changes that they're having to deal with, and it seems never ending. And the fact is, nowadays in the world we live in, it is never ending. Change that seems small to you, something that doesn't seem like a big deal, can cause your team to absolutely implode if it is the latest in a long series of changes that your team has dealt with. They just may be tired of dealing with change. They're done. They have had enough. So this is something to be aware of. If your team has been dealing with a lot of change, be aware that even a small change can make a big difference to them, and they can have a harder time adjusting in response. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see with lots of changes in a series of changes is that it's very hard to define what the future is going to look like, what the new process or what their new work life is going to look like when things keep shifting. Human beings are creatures of habit. Even if we are people who like variety and we like change, we like new stuff, we like to try different things, we all at some level or another need some sense of security and stability. When we're dealing with series of changes, it can be very difficult to imagine what is going to change next. There's an expectation that something else is going to change, and it becomes harder and harder for them to adjust to those changes in response. So think about that if you're dealing with a team that may be confused about a lot of changes that are happening. You may need to do more change management than maybe you expected to have to do for a small change. All right, so let's recap quickly. There are 4 positions, not just one, when you are trying to lead your pack or your team through some upcoming changes. First position is leading from the front of the pack, role modeling the behaviors, role modeling the expectations for the change. This is the more traditional position of power where the leader is expecting others to follow. This is a position where a leader can communicate with the whole team in a structured and organized way so everybody feels confident in your leadership and confidence in the change. The second position is at the back of the pack, which is a subtle style of leadership where there's a lot of behavioral observation, making sure nobody's left behind, watching for splintering within the group, watching for confusion within the group. You won't necessarily see if someone is trying to head left, somebody's trying to head right, and somebody's just sitting still in the middle if you're only leading from the front of the pack. So this is where that back of the pack position becomes so important. It gives you an opportunity to get an idea of how the team is moving forward, and it can involve several different pieces. It involves interactions with your people, it involves watching productivity and work product to see how they're adjusting, and watching the dynamics of the group to see if there are any challenges going on within the team. The third position is on the sides of the pack. This is the lateral observation position. This is watching upstream and downstream of the change. It's watching all interested parties in the change, all of your stakeholders, making sure that those people who need to be involved and informed are involved and informed. It's also looking out for trouble that may come from the sides that nobody's expecting. It means meeting with leaders upstream and downstream of your workflow to ensure everything's been thought through and communicated well between groups, and looking for those plan Bs, those contingencies as needed. The last position in the pack for a leader is in the middle of the pack. This is really the most intimate of the positions. It allows you as the leader to identify the very subtle concerns or challenges or excitement that the team may be feeling on an individual level. This is the position that requires a tremendous amount of trust with the individuals on your team, and it builds trust within your team. This is the place where the leader is going out of a regularly scheduled formal communication strategy to communicate on a more one-on-one basis, sharing your excitements and your concerns as appropriate with your team. This position in particular may take more time as a leader, especially if you're not used to going around and talking to your people on a one-on-one basis. You may find you need to spend more time in the middle of the pack during a change than you have in the past. So that is my Wolfpack leadership methodology for dealing with change as a leader. And now it's time for last call. For this last call, I would like for you to determine where you spend most of your time when you are leading in times of change. What pack position do you spend most of your time in? And what pack position do you spend the least amount of time in? I would like for you to think about and schedule times during your week to be in all 4 of these positions: front, back, sides, and in the middle. And work toward getting a good fluid blend of all 4 of these styles so that you're leading from every position as needed. And here's the second challenge during this last call. We'll call this a double shot. If you think that your team is going to be a little bit weirded out by your new approach to leadership and change, tell them about this methodology. Nothing I have said here today is a secret. Nothing I have said here today is something that you should not tell your people. Your team is likely to respond very positively if you share these ideas with them and tell them that you're going to be focusing on some different ways to interact with them during the time of change to help all of them and yourself to move through the change more effectively. Sometimes as leaders, we feel like we need to keep that stuff secret, but trusting our associates and having them trust us requires openness. So tell them what you're thinking. Tell them that you're interested in leading in a different way during this change, and maybe get some insight from them on where they need for you to be within the pack. Good luck with your changes. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or thoughts on this topic. If you like what you're hearing, share and subscribe. Email me if you have any success stories. I would love to hear them. And I will talk to you all soon. Bye. Well, thanks for joining me. If you have suggestions, feedback, or just something random you want to share, email me at careerspeakeasy@gmail.com. And come visit again soon. Cheers.